And joining us now on the debate for the full hour tonight, in Kingston, Ontario, Father Raymond de Souza, chaplain at the Newman House at Queen's University. And here in studio, Maura McQueen, professor of theology at the University of St. Michael's College here in Toronto and director of the Canadian Catholic Bioethics Institute. John Dalla Costa, founder of the Centre for Ethical Orientation. Stephen Scharper, professor of anthropology at UTM, the University of Toronto at Mississauga. And John Bentley Mays, columnist with the Catholic Register, and of course the longtime columnist with the Globe and Mail as well. This is a Your Agenda Thursday broadcast where you are part of the discussion, so you can reach us via Twitter at twitter.com/theagenda or by email at theagenda@tvo.org. Please jump in and join the debate. We also like to remind you that fifth column blogger Mike Miner is hosting a live chat on our Inside Agenda blog on our website. You can participate in our online survey there as well. We are asking the following questions. Number 1, are you Catholic? Number 2, has the Roman Catholic Church handled the matter of sexual abuse by priests adequately? Number 3, have the media overblown the issue? Okay, it gets trickier here. Number 4, would you leave your child alone with a priest? Number 5, should the Pope resign? Go to our homepage, tvo.org/theagenda, and you can join your fellow viewers in all of the above. Okay, thanks everybody for joining us tonight for, I think, what is an important discussion given what the Church is dealing with right now. And Father Raymond, it's good to see you again on our airwaves as well. I want to start, since you can't see us, just by letting you know that we've had a lot of chat on our websites about this, and I want to read two, I want to share two posts that we got from people just to sort of give you a sense about what the discussion is like going on, and then we'll come back and talk. Liberals in North America, the first one says, liberals in North America and Europe have been trying to destroy the Catholic Church for over half a century because it has refused to support the disastrous sexual revolution that they began in the 1960s. The inaccurate and irresponsible coverage of the pedophilia cases in the Catholic Church is the latest example of this effort. The percentage of pedophilia cases in all professions that deal with children, teaching, daycare, hockey coaching, etc., is exactly the same as it is in the Catholic Church. In all cases, the number of pedophiles was less than 1%. We got that. We also got this. It is unlikely this matter will ever be resolved in the open, and so religion will continue to lose influence and credibility in the longer term. I know personally that the sex abuse scandals have turned off formerly practicing and believing Catholics in disgust. Okay, Father Raymond, let's start with you first. Last month, of course, the Pope Benedict XVI issued a letter of apology for the abuses of the Irish Catholic Church. Help us to just bring us up to speed and into context here. What did the Pope have to say in that apology?
Well, the letter of March 19th followed a rather harrowing year in the Church in Ireland. Two major reports detailing decades of sexual abuse that was not only not addressed properly, but actually left to linger or even covered up. And so the Pope called all the Irish bishops to Rome in February, and they followed up with this letter. It expressed, as he's done many times, his sorrow and apology to the victims. That, in a certain sense, was not new. Necessary, of course, but not new. What was new in that letter was the very unsparing language addressed to those who had committed the crimes, and even more important, to his bishops in Ireland, saying that they had failed to apply canon law properly, they had failed to care for the victims, and had put too much emphasis on, if you want to say, the good name of the Church. And it proposed an investigation of the Church in Ireland, or different parts of it, with certain reforms that will be rolled out. So it was a very blunt letter. I mean, if it's available on the Vatican website. It's about 4,000 or 5,000 words long. It marked what is the hallmark of Benedict's approach to this problem, very blunt language. He takes it very seriously. And the reforms that are already underway in Ireland will get a sort of significant push. And he conceded in that letter, which I think is notable, this is not going to be solved swiftly. And he said that, apropos of the second letter you just read on the website, that he understands that many people would find it difficult to come to church if they've gone through this horror.
Okay, that puts the Vatican's position into some context here. We should also tell you the New York Times has been doing a lot of the legwork on this story, and here are a couple of the other things that we should put on the record as well, as they have reported, to once again put things in context. Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, the future Pope and Archbishop in Munich at the time, was copied on a memo that informed him that a priest whom he had approved sending to therapy in 1980 to overcome pedophilia would be returned to pastoral work within days of beginning psychiatric treatment, The priest was later convicted of molesting boys in another parish. That reported on the 25th of March by the Times. And here's another situation. Top Vatican officials, including the future Pope Benedict XVI, did not defrock a priest who molested as many as 200 deaf boys. The Wisconsin case involved an American priest, the Reverend Lawrence C. Murphy, who worked at a renowned school for deaf children from 1950 to 74. But it is only one of thousands of cases forwarded over decades by bishops to the Vatican office called the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, led from 1981 to 2005 by Cardinal Ratzinger. It is still the office that decides whether accused priests should be given full canonical trials and defrocked. In 1996, Cardinal Ratzinger failed to respond to 2 letters about the case of Reverend Murphy. So again, Father Raymond, let me just follow up with you on this, and then we'll get everybody involved here. How widespread do you believe the reports of sexual abuse are by Catholic priests?
Well, we know that since 2001, the congregation that you refer to has processed 3,000 cases that go back to 1950s and sometimes earlier. As to the 2 cases you mentioned, Steve, the Munich case, there's an explanation given, satisfactory or not, by the Archdiocese of Munich. The person responsible for that case has admitted he made a mistake in that case and said it wasn't Archbishop Ratzinger who made that decision. The more serious case is the Wisconsin case, because that was what really set off this 2-week intense examination on a global stage of this issue. And that story is completely false. I have written it extensively this morning in the National Post. It's a false story. The Vatican never stopped that trial. The source for that story is a discredited source, and that someone who's got a financial interest in that outcome of that case. So that story is false, and that's done serious damage, and the Pope deserves a defense on that. In general, though, you can say that what has gone on since if you want to say since the 1960s and 70s, is that there was a long period where these cases were not treated with the full disciplinary measures of the Church. In fact, quite to the contrary, they were shuffled off, covered up, ignored, neglected. As that went on, certain bishops in certain parts of the world felt the heat for that and started to reform. Canada actually took a lead in this in the late 80s, early 90s, and the United States in 2002. So both in Canada and the United States now, today, not before, but today, are very strict protocols, zero tolerance policies, mandatory reporting, all the things that we now would concede are pretty obvious things to do, but weren't done before. On a global level, we don't really know about every country. We know about Canada and the United States. Since 2001, what Cardinal Ratzinger, then John Paul, decided was that because these disciplinary measures were not being handled properly at the local level, that now all cases had to be reported to Rome. And since 2001, there have been 3,000 cases going back to the 1950s. 80% of them have been dealt with without trials, that is, that the evidence was so overwhelming or an admission of guilt was made. So in 80% of those cases, those priests have been disciplined or dismissed from the priesthood altogether. 20% of those cases have resulted in trials. The majority of those have resulted in dismissals.
Okay, Father Raymond, let me jump in here, because
Sure.
we got people here in the studio champing at the bit to get in. John Dalla Costa, the accusations that you've heard against this Pope and against this church, how credible do you think they are?
Well, they're credible because they have been politicized. So they've become part of the discourse. And people do not have the diagnostic information or the time to go through all of the accusations with a fine-tooth comb. So they draw their impressions from their own experience and from what's happening within the church overall. So one of the things that we learned about scandals in trust work is that, in fact, scandals are not what causes suspicion to grow. There are everyday degradations of experience. There are moments where accountability isn't forthcoming. There are moments where the access to information is blunted. Then when the scandal occurs, it is confirmation of those experiences for people. So I would say that the church has struggled with the diagnostics in terms of getting its information and its story out, but the real failure has been more on the symbolic level, on dealing with this issue as a crisis that affects victims and that also has sacramental implications for the life of the church. So it's on those terms that I think credibility has been impinged.
Moira McQueen, what do you say?
Well, I think credibility has definitely, is still suffering and has suffered. I appreciate what Father de Souza is saying about the way that Canada, for example, has already gone to great lengths to try and make sure, first of all, to apologise to victims, to do things like compensate in terms of providing psychotherapy, that kind of thing. So not just financial. As we know, many dioceses are bankrupt, actually, because of the payments they've had to make. And most of us who are not involved personally feel that that's justified, that this is, as the church as a body, should be taking care of its members. So I think, yes, definitely credibility continues to suffer. One, I don't know if I can say it's a good thing, but at least since these things are beginning to come to light, and not just in the Catholic Church, I mean, I really do believe this is a universal problem. You made a list yourself. It's a societal problem, and it just kind of happens that it has come to light here. At least it gives us a chance to get to grips with it and maybe take some more steps to make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen, at least to the same extent. I think if you're talking about something like pedophilia, it's practically impossible to eradicate in that sense. It may in fact help us to come to a different level of understanding, things like different ways of approaching entrances into seminary, all that kind of thing. And I do believe that in most countries, and especially since the Vatican has been very strong in its statements, that there's a definite emphasis on improving everything and trying to at least make some kind of restitution.
John Bentley Mays.
I think that Ray de Souza makes a very important point by trying to insist that the Catholic Church has done all within its power. I'm never convinced about that. I don't know when enough is enough. I don't know at what point that the accusations don't simply overwhelm the process of trying to come to terms with these things.
But I'm inferring that you think that point's pretty close.
That
you think we're there, where the accusations have overwhelmed the process.
I think that they have.
Yeah.
And I think that writing letters is all very well. I think the Catholic Church has dealt with this so far like any mid-sized corporation, with letters of apology, with the lopping off of heads of a few middle management, with a few things like that. But not really, it seems to me it hasn't gone beyond that. And that's what I'm waiting for.
Did you find the letter of the Pope sincere?
I found it sincere, but it's a letter.
Meaning?
Meaning that it is just, it forms a kind of complex of the way that corporations deal with these kinds of crises. It doesn't go beyond that. To the caring for the victims that I'm most concerned about, it doesn't seem to go beyond that very far.
Okay. Stephen Scharper, your view.
Yes, just picking up on this excellent point by John Bentley Mays. I mean, I think that one of the things this calls into question is the ability of the Church to look very holistically, seriously, candidly, and prayerfully at this crisis. And as we see from Vatican II, the Church is not just the episcopacy, it's not just clerics, it's the people of God. And this is a challenge for the entire Church as a people of God to deal with this horror. As we can see, and as has been pointed out, it's not just a case of a few bad apples. It's a case of a few bad bushels, and they're not restricted to one orchard, they're spread globally. That this is a systemic issue. And whether or not these incidences are of a higher proportion in the Catholic Church than they are in other areas, and I don't think we've heard the end of the numbers here. Even if that were the case, the Catholic Church still has to take this seriously. This is a profound moment.
Do you think they do not take it seriously?
I think they do take it seriously, but it has to be at, as Archbishop Mancini said in his Easter message in Halifax, a moment of refounding. He talked about, in a sense, himself not having the answers. That this is a time where the Church has to really prayerfully reflect on this. And I think this might be a time for the Pope and other leaders in the Church to call for an international day of prayer for the Catholic Church, and maybe inviting Christians of other denominations, indeed even people of other faiths, to pray with the Church as it goes seriously with a concern for the victims, a compassionate and just attitude to reorient itself in light of this.
John Dalla Costa, how would that be welcomed by the world, this day of prayer?
I think it would be a welcomed opening, because to both the points that were just made, the Church has responded in many ways in almost the traditional crisis management mode. First, a bit of denial. It's not that big a deal. Then it is a few bad apples. Then we're taking care of it internally. Again, what we know from the corporate sector, Wall Street, for example, you don't trust the bankers to rewrite the rules of the financial system after they brought it to an abyss. You need some type of participation, some type of opening. And so the possibility of inviting people to participate in this moment of learning. Again, as we heard in that first viewer who commented about how pedophilia is common across all those professions, that may very well be statistically true, but the church has a special role. This is a profound, again, teaching moment, learning moment, self-reflection moment for the church that may, if we handle this in a creative way, help society deal with issues like this.
In which case, let me ask Father de Souza in Kingston. We know that Pope Benedict has a multi-decade relationship with the church. We know he is known to be one of the more conservative voices in this church. And I know you think that's a good thing, and that's fine. But it does have some people asking whether he's the right guy to lead them through whatever it is they have to go through in order to deal with this issue appropriately. What do you say to that?
Well, I think you don't have to speculate on the future. You can just look at the past. He was the one who, in 2001, changed the rules. He was the one who made it possible to dismiss priests administratively without trial when the evidence was overwhelming. And he was the one who approved in 2002, and fought for, actually, in 2002, the American Bishops' Protocol. John Bentley Mays is correct. Words are necessary, but they're not sufficient. But just look at the United States, which has the most active reporting. On the 23rd of March, 2 days before the New York Times story, they released the audit for 2009. 6 million children had been in Catholic environments given safe environment training, 2 million background checks on volunteers, priests, etc. The most extraordinary thing in an independently audited study, or results for 2009, there were 6 allegations in 2009 of abuse of current minors. There are more allegations that go back to the 60s and 70s, but in 2009 there were 6 allegations. 6 too many, of course, but in 68 million people in the Catholic Church of the United States. So it's not just words, it's not just apologies. They're really concrete actions that have been taken. The United States, they can honestly say that the safest place for a child is likely a Catholic environment because of the new procedures.
John Dalla Costa wants
we don't have as much reporting, but in Canada we have much of the same protocols that the Americans have, and had them actually 10 years before. So the comments of the other panelists are correct, that words are not sufficient and real systemic change is necessary. And in many parts of the world, that painful process is just now beginning.
I'm loving all the, I got to tell you, I'm loving all the contributions tonight, but it's an hour show, everybody, and we got to be a little more economical in our, I'm not picking on you, Father Ray. I'm going after everybody there.
The other people.
Okay, John Dalla Costa, go ahead.
Father Ray's point about the United States taking a progressive lead on this is really important. I had the opportunity 2 years ago to work with the U.S. Catholic bishops on actually the fundamental issue of rebuilding trust, an acknowledgement that some systemic changes had been put in place, including the monitoring and auditing that Father just referred to, but that the impact in terms of assurance, both for existing Catholics, for lapsed Catholics, particularly those who had moved away because of the pedophilia scandal, and for society at large, continued to decline. Credibility is continuing to freefall. And this was where we had some of the conversation that's already emerged here. Ideas around how can we bring a sacramental perspective to this? How can we bring the stories of victims into our liturgy? How can we bring the story of forgiveness into our understanding of what these priests who have committed these offenses are going through? These are incredible resources that the church can bring from a moral understanding, and that's the next phase in this process, a larger phase.
Right. I agree, thank you. Yeah, I mean, this whole business of credibility, I find it really fascinating that, in fact, at one level, we're all very sure that the church has suffered in that area. On the other hand, our churches seem to be busier than ever, and that's statistical. And this is not new, although the things about Benedict have hit the waves, over the past few weeks, etc. But the whole problem of abuse in so many different forms has been, we've known about it for a much longer time. So it's not as if it's a sudden thing and, should Benedict resign, as you were saying. It really has nothing to do with him, perhaps at one level, if he were involved in one particular incident.
But I hear what you're saying, but you know what? If this were to have taken place in a major corporation, let's say in the United States, You can bet there would be people on Capitol Hill calling for, you know, the CEO's head.
Oh, fair enough, yes. And just as
So
people, as you say, are maybe
are
calling for Benedict's head, but it's not going to happen.
He's
And
not going to resign.
Not only that, I don't really think the vast majority of Catholics want him to. I don't honestly think that we can see there's problems. I agree completely. I mean, I feel really dreadful for victims. As a mother, the idea of something like that happened to one of my own children, would it shake my faith? I honestly don't know.
Well, let me ask
but
John
most
Bentley
of
Mays
us
on
are,
this.
you know, we're still Catholic, and it's not about the Pope. The
Okay,
faith is much deeper
John's
than
Catholic,
that.
and probably unlike the rest of you, he chose to be a Catholic. You converted.
I certainly did.
You weren't born Catholic, you
And I'm
chose
living
it.
with that every day.
Welcome.
Do you think the Pope should resign?
No. I said that in a moment of haste in a column that
You sure did.
fortunately didn't get published.
No, they spiked that one, didn't they?
They spiked that one. Not because I was calling for the Pope to resign specifically, but because they thought it would cause an outrage among their readers.
That's what you're supposed to do, isn't it?
Well, I would imagine so, but that's not what they felt at the time. No, my faith isn't shaken. I'm angry. I'm dismayed. I'm a parent as well, and I have a strong feeling about my child, my grandchild, these people, and by extension, all the grandchildren and all children. I think we can speak about that collectively, that we feel that way. Mainly, I think that the sacramental ministry of the church needs to be extended to all of us who are angry as well and who are dismayed. I'm embarrassed that the church keeps facing these kind of accusations.
If all of this were happening in the midst of your conversion, might you have thought twice about it?
It was happening in the midst of my conversion.
Well,
The church is not just an institution, though. It's also a project. It's a project that involves healing the sick, and binding up the brokenhearted, and all the other things that Christians believe that they should be doing. It was that project that I identified with. The institutional church has always been a problem ever since I went to the Vatican in 1999 for the opening of the holy doors that Father de Souza recalls. It's been a problem for me ever since, and always will be, because the institution is made up of diseased wood, and it's liable to break at any moment.
If I can be more specific than that, actually, Stephen Scharper, the institution is made up of diseased male wood. There are no women in positions of influence in this organization, or let's say a precious few. Let's say a precious few. You're going to give me that?
In positions of power or influence?
Yeah, okay, power. Let's say power.
Okay.
It's a male institution. Let's hit it on the head here. Is that a problem?
Well, I think patriarchy is a problem, obviously, and I think this, in a sense, not allowing half of the church to express itself in a way that gives fullness to their individuality and creativity is indeed a problem, and it's something that the church obviously has to deal with and wrestle with. I'm not a psychologist and can't comment on the role of that patriarchy directly in terms of this particular series of scandals. However, if in the perception there's a sense that people who are committing pedophilia or ephebophilia, older adolescents involving that sexual abuse, can somehow move beyond the radar screen and be given safe haven in a kind of organization that will not bring this to light, if that's the perception, this is a very big problem.
I want to get Moira and Father Ray on this, which is virtually every other institution in the world has acknowledged that you got to let women in the front door. I'm being colloquial here in the way I'm saying it. You know what I'm saying. Women get to go into the front door of the church as long as they want to be nuns and quiet.
Right.
But the Newsweek's got a terrific cover story written by a woman saying that as long as this insists on being an institution that is basically 99.9% male in positions of power, living before the Enlightenment, these are her words, not mine, this church is going to have trouble. Is she accurate? Is she right about that?
I really don't think so. I mean, I really do believe that women are not held back by the church. It's true we can't be priests.
You don't call that being held back?
Well, maybe if I'd wanted to be a priest, I would think so. But I mean, and it's true that the priesthood is kind of suffering in terms of numbers of vocations, even among men. So there's another whole theological question there, I think, about who should be part of the priesthood.
Okay, but what about allowing women?
I think women, well, I think it's as in, you know, many other areas, even in the business world, so many women are still talking about hitting the glass ceiling. So we're hitting the Sistine Chapel ceiling or something like that. I think that's probably true, but at the same time, there's more and more of us, like myself, theologically educated. If you look at our theological schools, it could be, in fact, there's more women than men, that kind of thing. I can be a really involved Catholic. I can work in ethics. I can work in social justice. I can fulfill my vocation, thanks be to God, if you like, and it really has nothing to do with something like the hierarchy.
You can't be the Pope, you can't be a cardinal, you can't
you know
be a
what?
priest, you can't be a bishop.
I bless them and I really wish them well in their jobs. It's a little bit like being the Queen. I wouldn't want that job either, and she's a woman, you know. So it's not really the role or the power or anything like that. Sometimes I think maybe when people get upset about patriarchy, these days, I mean, I think in days gone by, historically, and again, not just in the church, I mean, women were certainly, you know, when did women get the vote? That kind of thing.
Let me get Father Ray
It's not just the
D'Souza on
church.
this. Father Ray, is it a problem that the Catholic Church in the year 2010 is still overwhelmingly a male institution?
Well, the priesthood is male, as Moira pointed out. That's a theological question. The church itself is overwhelmingly female in terms of if you go to the people who are actually in the pews.
I'm talking about the power.
I understand your point. I think one of the insights that came out of the Canadian experience and the American experience was greater lay participation and oversight. Most dioceses now have lay boards, which assist the bishop in sexual abuse cases, the men and women. But there are certain things that are distractions, and this is a distraction from care of children and protecting your victims. What we know from the exhaustive statistical studies now being done on sexual abuse in the Catholic clergy, which has always been male, which has always been in the Latin Church celibate, is that there was an enormous spike, almost a doubling or tripling of cases from about 1965 to 1985. The priesthood remained the same before and after and during that. Something went wrong in that period, and that's what we need to fix and what we need to pay attention to. We can have discussions about the ordination of women and other things, but they're not really related to the question of sexual abuse, because we know that throughout the period under scrutiny, there were periods of relatively low incidence and periods of very, very high incidence. And that's really what the question is that needs to be addressed if we're talking about the safety of minors.
John Dalla Costa.
One of the patterns that's emerging in the academic research around business ethics is that, in fact, women do bring a different orientation to moral decision making in a corporate environment. And I would suspect that some of the benefits that we're seeing there would, in fact, help us in some of the conversations that we're having around this issue and really other governance issues in the church. One of the statistical points is that in Canada, about 12% of the people who sit on boards are women. We don't have that governance representation. We don't have that experience either in the election of our popes or in the difficult delving into issues like this. So we are excluding not only the creativity of those people, but it would seem from the ethical research a different ethical frame that could help inform this particular problem.
Father Ray, do you accept that?
I would agree with culture of decision making. I wrote about that last week in the Post. The problem it manifests in the church is what we would call clericalism, which is that sees the priesthood or the episcopate as a privilege or as a club to be defended against, and that clearly was a problem. I think greater lay participation, which includes men and women, has a great impact. Could have a great impact on that. But we can't reach for sort of sunny fixes. I mean, the case of the Murphy case, the Wisconsin case, the Chancellor of the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, who was along with the Archbishop there negligent, was a woman. So I mean, to say that women will make it better, the Murphy report in Ireland talked about the Magdalene schools and the sisters who ran those schools and the abuse in those schools. So I think we have to get away from a culture of clericalism. Is clericalism, can it be reinforced or supported by chauvinism of a certain kind? I don't think that's not a great stretch to me. That's a possibility. And what we need is on these particular issues especially, a governance that's more collaborative and shared, and that's actually the mandates that most dioceses in this country and Canada already have. So
John Bentley Mays.
I would agree with that.
The statistics we've been hearing about the 1960s and about the increase of incidence of these cases in the 1960s, I don't know, the 60s seem to get blamed for a lot of things.
Well, it's about 1965 to 1985.
But what is it? What happened? I mean, we're not talking about the Second Vatican Council here, are we?
What we're talking about, I think, and this was raised in Benedict's letter, is that in that period, it's mostly the 1970s actually, John, not so much the 60s, but that the church tried to get away from penal measures, punishments, and so forth, not just in this question of misconduct, clerical misconduct, but in the liturgy, in doctrine, in many things. And for most part, there were not canonical penalties administered on a whole wide range of issues. That's probably a contributing factor, and that's slowly being changed in the 1990s and onwards. But for a long time in the Catholic Church, especially in North America, but also in Europe, the disciplinary life of the church was just sort of abdicated. So I don't think this is a question of blaming the sexual revolution, if that's what John's suggesting, but of a culture change that took place in the church at that time. It's mostly the 1970s.
Well, let's hit this on the head here. We just saw, you know, during the course of the broadcast, Father Ray, you can't see it there in Kingston, but people have been emailing or tweeting to this program, and we've occasionally during the course of it put their comments up on the screen. Somebody just wrote in and said, and Michael Smith, let's go to the bottom of page 5 here and bring up this next graphic if we can. People have been saying, you got to let priests marry. You don't have this problem in other religions. In other religions, their clergymen can marry, and it's different here. Here's something we got to our website, tvo.org/theagenda, posted by a viewer. Ideally, this will force the Catholic Church to modernize, permitting priestly marriage, enabling women to be ordained, etc. Although I doubt it, at the very least, it will hopefully put more pressure on church officials to consider more carefully who they elect to be the next pope. Stephen Scharper, would a lot of this problem go away if priests could marry?
Well, I think the issue of clericalism, which Father de Souza brings up, is a very important one. And if this kind of clericalism where there is a superiority of the cleric vis-a-vis the laity is something that's enshrined, and that's enshrined in a male patriarchal crust, well, that does become a problem, involving women, involving laity, involving children perhaps, etc. So I think that there is this larger cultural dynamic at work here that kind of permeates a church culture in myriad ways. And so I think, indeed, there are antecedents and also connectors in this question to these wider issues.
I'm not sure you answered me, though. If you allowed priests to marry, does a lot of this problem go away?
I don't know. I mean, I could not answer that.
That's a fair answer.
Yeah.
That's fair. Okay, John and then Moira.
I don't know that that's the only solution. I think, again, it's a systemic problem. It's a complicated problem. One of the things is that the current reality has unfortunately also besmirched many wonderful priests. There are priests who operate incredibly effectively and sacramentally from their commitment to celibacy. So we shouldn't wipe away, again, the contribution of many of the people who have taught me, who just are wonderful priests and who bring an integrity to the Eucharist that has really kept me in the church through a lot of struggles. So I think that something that diminishes that reality is as problematic as finding an easy solution on the other side of the ledger. I think it's a complicated question.
That is an interesting point. Moira?
Just something I read recently said, and maybe Father Raymond again knows the stats, is that there's something like 400,000 Catholic priests universally. And I think he mentioned 3,000 cases since 2001, which actually covers the cases that went back to from 1950 onwards. So it's not even 3,000 cases from 2001 to 2010. So I'm not suggesting this is a numbers game, because as even the Pope has said, one is too many, etc. But vis-a-vis, and John is making that point too, the number of priests who do remain celibate, and so celibacy is more than an option for them. I mean, they're actually living that celibacy, and many of them in a truly generative way. And I think we have to be able to look at that as well. I think the other point, though, is if we look at celibacy, anything I've read seems to suggest that, especially if you're talking about pathologies, if you're talking about ephebolia or pedophilia itself, these sexual preferences are set before we're adolescent. So I mean, it really has nothing to do with celibacy, which is a choice later on.
I hear what you're saying, except that by having I'm not taking a position on this, I'm throwing it out here for discussion, let's be clear about that. By establishing rules which say only men who must be sexually abstinent can have this job, does it not invite a potential group of people to apply for that job who might ordinarily not, given whom they find themselves in connection with all the time that they have the job?
Yes, no, I understand that in a different way. I think that's a slightly different question from the celibacy issue per se. And I do think that some of the things we've read reveal that in fact some people have been, well, in some ways, joining a group where they think there will be male support, that kind of thing. I don't think that they enter it in order to, you know, exert their sexual preferences. But I think there must be something within that culture that they're actually looking for or belonging to, and it does give some people the opportunity to practice.
John, what do you say on that?
I don't think that, personally, I don't believe that celibacy is the issue here. I'm not sure that allowing priests to marry would solve anything. Marriage is difficult. You know, I mean, any celibate person who believes that marriage is easy is crazy or deluded. It's very difficult. It's as difficult in its way in this particular age that we live in as is celibacy. So I don't believe that it would be. I'm a little bit more vexed about the question of about women, about women's leadership within the church. I can't imagine that an all-male club is a good idea for any organization. It just doesn't make sense to me. That to involve women more and more fully in the life of the church should be the mission of the church, in the power structures of the church.
Father Ray, I want to ask you, what effect do you think all of this is having on Catholic parishioners today?
Well, let me just, if I could, I will answer that, Steve, but...
you want to kick at the last part first?
Well, the thing is that, you know, I've been on your program before, which I enjoy doing, thank you very much. There's no problem in the Catholic world to which women's ordination and the marriage of the clergy is not the solution for some. But the evidence, if you're really interested in the safety of children, if you look at the incidence of sexual abuse, if you look at the studies, the vast majority of children who are sexually abused in their own families, often by people who are married. They're sometimes even their own parents or relatives that are married. There are profiles that the church has to pay attention to because we do have a celibate priesthood, and so that manifests, that there are dangers that manifest themselves there that have to be scrutinized. That might go back to John Bentley Mays' question about the 1970s when the scrutiny was less so. But the vast majority of sexual abuse does not take place by, is not committed by celibates. So if you're interested in the safety of children, celibacy is a secondary issue. In general, for the church, we have to be sure in the training of our priests that, as you suggested in your question, that those who may be attracted for malevolent reasons are kept out at the outset. As to the
okay, hold that thought, because I knew you were going to go there, but Stephen wanted to make a fast comment on that, and then I'll get back to you on the parishioners. Go ahead.
Yes,
Stephen.
I know you're segueing to the credibility question, and I'm wondering if a type of Truth and Reconciliation Commission, a la South Africa, headed by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, might not be appropriate in terms of this moment in the Catholic Church. And then these issues could be discussed in relationship to the primary issue right here are the victims and the horrible reality they have experienced at the hands of members of the people of God. But in so doing, involving women, involving lay people, involving the whole people of God, these questions then can be discerned, again, to use the words of Archbishop Mancini of Halifax, in this refounding moment. So I think that something like that can emerge, and the questions about the ordination of women and also the involvement of laity and women as fully empowered people in the church can emerge as part of this Truth and Reconciliation moment.
Okay, just Father Raymond, just before I go back to you, I promise I will, Mike Miner is at an undisclosed location in this building, and he's he's handling our online chat this evening.
I'm in an undisclosed location.
You are. I must say the background of that shot is about the ugliest we've ever seen, Father Raymond. I'm really sorry we couldn't do better than that. But anyway, Mike Miner, let me say, your background's not a heck of a lot better, Mike. But anyway, why don't you tell us what people are talking about online on our website tonight on this subject?
It's absolutely all I can do to keep up with Steve. There are many answers, and they are long and nuanced. And it's interesting because we have a lot of people who aren't Catholics, but we also have quite a few Catholics and a lot of people who are former Catholics. And you ask how the parishioners are responding to this. The people who are a little bit cynical feel completely, reinforced in their opinions. And they're discussing about causes. A lot of Mike D is saying that he wants priests to marry, and they're echoing the calls for women to be able to be priests. But Zoe and CJ, who are regular chatters here, are pointing out that this may not be the root of the problem. There's power aspects there. But for the people who are Catholics and supportive, we have someone who's talking about how his priest in Oakville is celebrating 71 years and what an inspiration he is to the community. Another guy, John here, is saying that you know, his priest was a great influence on his life and helped mold him. And they are having so much trouble finding their experience and their Catholic Church in all of this. And so much of the criticism right now is not so much about the crimes themselves. The people's opinions have been spoken about that, and they know where they stand. But there are a lot of people, both inside and outside the church, who are very confused by what they see as a defensive reaction out of the Vatican.
Mike, keep monitoring. Thank you for that, and we'll check back with you just before the top of the clock tonight. Okay, as promised, Father de Souza in Kingston. What effect is all of this having on Catholic parishioners, in your view?
Well, I think that it depends on what the relationship with the church is. I mean, my parish is over on Wolf Island. We have a very small community. Everybody knows everybody else. Clearly, many people have expressed to me their concern for me if I've been sort of hurt or disappointed by it. So in that sense, I mean, the people do, as indicated by some of those comments, rally around their priests, the ones that they know, the ones whom they trust, and so I think that's applicable in many Catholic parishes. I think that there is a sense of deep hurt, shame as well, but deep hurt both for what went on at the hands of priests and also how it was handled by the bishops. And I think that one of the things that needs to be communicated to Catholics by our own people is that that there's no apologizing or rather minimizing what went on in the past, but it's also important to realize what has gone on in the future. I think what's going on now, I think the ones who really suffered in this is the credibility of our bishops, because they were the overseers who overlooked it too much. But I think in fairness, you have to say the bishops of today, 2010, are paying a price for their predecessors 20 or 30 years ago. But there's no doubt that that it's been a deep blow, and Catholics have a sense that we are all, as we all claim to share in the glory of the saints, we're implicated also in the sins of the wicked in our own midst, and it's been very difficult.
Let me get Moira on that. Do you think that how is this affecting parishioners in your view?
Well, I was at 3 different churches over the Triduum, the 3 days over Easter, and every single one of them was really packed. And on a couple of occasions, an allusion was made to what had been going on, and people prayed for them, and I agree.
An allusion made by whom?
By the priest, to just what had been going on, and they did pray for them in the prayers on Good Friday, and I thought that was good. So, I mean, there's a real sense to me that all of us are taking it very seriously. Nobody's trying to downplay anything. I don't even think most of us are really feeling defensive, because we're not the ones who are being attacked, you know. And I do think that many of us have problems with the Catholic Church, whether it be about ordination or anything else. Those will continue. This is something else, though, that is, to me, I think I said this earlier, it's really social as well as being Catholic. It's a problem we really need to come to grips with. But in ordinary parishes.
John Bentley Mays, can you tell yet whether parishioners are being kind of driven away from the church because of this?
Because of this, I don't know. They say that they are in blogs, and who can believe this stuff? I mean, who can believe what's on the internet anymore?
St. Peter's Square was packed on Easter Sunday.
The thing that concerns me are people who are in that middle position, not the outright unbelievers who are skeptical of the church and who don't believe it can do anything right, and not the people who are staying with the church no matter what, but that broad middle range of people who are disaffected to begin with, and for whom this is simply a confirmation of that distance that they feel between themselves and the church. Those are the people that concern me the most. And I don't know what's happening with them. I really don't.
John Dalla Costa?
I think it is, what's most disconcerting is actually that group of lapsed Catholics, or nearly lapsed Catholics, because actually we need their voices and their participation back in the church. I miss them. I would like their questions, the concerns that perhaps led them to leave the church. Many of them are still seeking spiritual sustenance, but they're going elsewhere for that. And I think we could learn a lot as a church about what it is that they're seeking and learn from what their questions have been. What we know from trust rehabilitation is that it's a long-term problem and it requires a long-term vision and solution. Hence the idea of something like truth and reconciliation is so important, because it begins to build a foundation. We have to stop reacting and begin to expose everything. And so one of the recommendations we made to the US bishops was take an entire liturgical year and devote it to the victims. What in the mystical tradition is called purification. Go through the suffering, go through the agony, understand what people have gone through.
What was the reaction to that?
The second year, if I can just finish the model, would be more about illumination, again in the mystical tradition. And that's where we would perhaps put together commissions and task forces of lay people and religious people to explore systemic issues, not just on the pedophilia issue, but on other issues that always come up in these kinds of conversations. The third phase would be the unitive in the mystical tradition. It's called where you come in a place of communion and begin to bring back into the community the lessons that the church has learned from going through this process. So this is a big problem. You're not going to solve it with one audit period or with one particular disqualification.
When did you pitch this idea?
2 years ago.
And what was the reaction?
It got politicized. And it became a power issue where, because we were advising a group that reported to the bishops, it felt that it was putting, so for example, one group thought, oh, we're going to have a year where everybody's just going to be talking about the victims. No bad news. We don't want to go back to the bad news. Well, if we look at the church's 2,000-year history, a 3-year period to go through this in a systematic way, that brings a sacramental integrity to it.
Right. Okay, Stephen, your view.
Yes, I really appreciate what John Dalla Costa is saying, and it reminds me of how some theologians talk about the church in terms of the logic of mission and the logic of maintenance, and part of it's the balancing. And it seems that this kind of real digging into what happened with the victims and a solidarity with victims speaks to the mission of the church in terms of Jesus' own mission to the lepers, to the poor, to the marginalized, to the outcast, and building that into the life of the institution and finding that proper balance. And so this question of how people are responding, well, you're always going to have some who will, in a sense, circle the wagons around, load up their ecclesial guns and start firing. But then you have, I think, many people who are at sea. They're adrift, and they're looking for a compass. And I think that compass has to be the truth. It has to be the truth in a loving, just, compassionate, but nonetheless honest pursuit.
Does the church have the leadership in place today to do that?
Well, Pope Benedict has said this is a test for the church. I think he's right. And I think he can help bring about this kind of deep-seated reflection that John Dalla Costa is talking about, and John as well, that we have to engage in. Otherwise, I think we are not being true to the deep, tough spiritual calling that we're summoned to.
Okay, a few minutes left here, and let's go around the horn as quickly as we can here on, we've heard what you would like the church to do. What do you think more of the church is going to do to respond to this?
I think it is taking it seriously. I think Michael Higgins suggested something like having a synod, which would include lay people too. So I think that basic idea is really good. They have synods about so many other things, the synod on the family. Why not have one on abuse in all its forms? I think something like that is more likely to happen, possibly because it could be organized from Rome and the mechanisms in place for that to happen. I think something like that would be excellent. I think the Catholic Church, all the Christian churches, most people who are religious are all about conversion. I think it's an individual thing. I'm really, like most people, feel really most worried about the victims. I know we can maybe cleanse ourselves internally. As long as that actually involves the victims, I'm almost more worried about that than just having lay people or women involved. The victims might be lost in
John,
that.
what do you hope the church will do?
What do I hope the church will do, or what do I believe it will do?
I know those are two different questions. So let's talk about what do you hope the church will do in reaction?
I hope the church will throw open the windows, allow the fresh air in, go through a period of listening to the victims and cleansing itself of the stigma that has been attached to it and the shame that has been brought about on it.
Okay, the other half of the question now, what do you think they'll do?
I think the church will rise to the occasion.
You do?
I do.
You're the optimist.
I am an optimist. I believe that the church has always throughout its history renewed itself in the same way, by going back to its sources, by going back to the basic proclamation of the kingdom of God, which is among the poor and the victims and the needy and the naked and the hungry. And that's how the church always renews itself, inevitably, and I think it will again.
Father Raymond de Souza, you get the last word tonight. What do you hope the church will do?
Well, I think John put it very well, actually, and part of what Benedict said to Ireland, he said, look, we've what 3 centuries of persecution couldn't do, we've done to ourselves, and this is a moment of testing, a moment of interior renewal, a moment of reform in the church. So I think John put that very well. I think that's what's in store. In fact, what I think will happen is that in the next 5 years, you'll see that almost every country in the world has what Canada and the United States have already done. And that can be a matter of some pride, I guess, for Canadian Catholics, but it's really of a service that our very wrenching experience here and in the United States could be a lesson for others. And I think probably 5 years from now, that will be the concrete effect of, if you want to say this, very tumultuous Holy Week, is that most countries in the world will have adopted the current practices and policies that we have here. And John is right, the way forward for the Church is always a way of purification and penance. The comments about years of repentance, that echoes what went on before the Holy Year of 2000. John Paul launched a period of preparation which included repentance for the sins of the past. So that too might be of a useful model, a recent model of how to go forward.
Okay.
And
I want to
like
thank
John, I'm an optimist. I'm hopeful.
I'm glad I'm surrounded by optimists tonight. That's a nice thing. Raymond de Souza from the Newman House at Queen's University, thanks so much for being there on the line for us, from Kingston, Ontario tonight.
Thank you, Steve.
John Dalla Costa for the Centre for Ethical Orientation, John Bentley Mays, the columnist with the Catholic Register and Globe and Mail. On the other side of the table, Moira McQueen from the University of St. Michael's College, and Stephen Scharper, University of Toronto Mississauga. Thanks so much to you two as well.